Lecture 6. We have all experienced the result of impressions that we have accumulated in the past and stored away in our subconscious mentality. Our subconscious mentality has been filled with erroneous ideas, images, and fears that have kept us back and prevented us from really living impressions of fear, worry, anxiety, disease, despondency that give rise to a doubtful mental attitude and then breed failure. When the dominant idea in the mind is fear, everything works around that dominant idea and brings about a life of impotency. When the dominant idea becomes the truth regarding our oneness with life, then everything moves around that dominant idea and produces itself in our circumstances and life. Negative thought material, instead of being of any value, brings more and more of its kind into our lives, and we are ever busy trying to patch up our lives without result. The majority of people have allowed this state to exist. It has taken root in the subconscious and is out picturing itself and thwarting them at every turn. But if we begin now to store up courageous thoughts full of optimism, identifying ourselves with our true state, creating a positive and faithful attitude and refusing to be associated with the prevailing negative thoughts which make us slaves, we need have no anxiety about the future. We will find that our future is safe because we are making it now. And now is the time. There is not a moment to be lost. We will then be free from the patchwork which is the hallmark of the attitude of mind that creates serfdom. There is no theory or guesswork about these truths. There is nothing secret about them when we begin to understand them. They are so plain that everyone can make use of them. We must be sure that the right material is put into our minds. This alone is a guard against any negative kind of thinking. A lot of people may understand this intellectually, but then to understand it intellectually is not sufficient. You must have the feeling behind it, and that feeling must be a knowing so deep that there is always an expression of feeling rising up within you, a feeling of this tremendous power, through your oneness with the divine life. Intellect is on the surface and is of very little value in and by itself. That is why, though there are today a great many people in this world who have a good education, yet there are many who, having no education at all, have made a greater success of their lives. Perhaps they have not fully understood the truth, but they have struck upon the principle of feeling deeply, and behind their thinking was that strong feeling that impels success. A great many people who have a good education today are merely as it were jogging along, doing nothing worthwhile to make themselves successful or to bring themselves happiness. They are always thinking negatively. And if they are not thinking negatively, they are always living on the surface and indulging in what we call light talk. They talk about the books they have read, the different societies they belong to, and the small things that people of their type do. But remember that deep down in you is the reality, the spice of life. See that it comes up to the surface, and then your thoughts will be of the substance that makes real people in the world. When we acquire the right mental state, we know that we are heirs to our rich inheritance, the practical power of the spirit and mind that can produce for us an abundance of every good thing, health, happiness, and a successful life. It offers us peace, poise, strength, and beauty. But to assert our claim, we must take possession. We must refuse to accept the heredity of erroneous thinking, a legacy left to us by our forefathers, and we must claim the heredity of our divine nature, which is continually urging us to accept our share of the unlimited resources of the universe, which is ready to flow into everyone capable of receiving. And it is this state of receiving that is so essential in one's life. How does one then receive from the omnipotent? By recognizing the omnipotent and opening oneself to this tremendous power and wisdom. The doorway is the consciousness. The consciousness must become aware of itself to know that it is the individualized consciousness of the infinite mind and that there is no separation. From the divine consciousness flows the inexhaustible resources of the Almighty into the human consciousness, which is aware of its own source. To keep these doors open is the great secret of power, and these doors are kept open by a recognition of a feeling that you are united and not separate. There are times when perhaps this feeling of consciousness will be receding and certain conditions of fear or unhappiness come into your life, but it should not be very long before you begin to reassert yourself and you then find that these negative thoughts that enter your mind no longer affect you. The dominant attitude will eventually be that you are completely aware of standing apart from all conditions, standing so apart that these conditions cannot enter your life again. A little boy, very nervous, was brought to me the other day. He was affected by everything that was said or done to him. I said to him, "Look, Sonny, have you ever seen a duck? Have you ever seen how the water runs off the duck's back?" He said, "Yes." I said, "That is what is going to happen to you. Whenever anybody says anything to you, you think of the duck and let it run off your back like water off the duck." And now he does not take any notice of anything anybody says. At his age, he knew that the life in him was God living in him. He and God were one. Now if a little boy can claim his own inheritance, surely you can too. Divine metaphysics guides us into the right channels and enables us to obtain the bounties that are awaiting us. This source of all life, power, and substance is within ourselves, made in the image and likeness of God. By this understanding only can we build a solid foundation. Those who have this foundation will build the real things of life. We will discover that we possess hidden power and abilities that will lift us far beyond the ordinary mortal who lives in perpetual fear and doubt. Never again will we be timid, weak, and stupid, living in consciousness of error and expressing that error. These words have a tremendous significance, and it is necessary for you to be aware of them to such an extent that you will feel their potency. When you have a consciousness of error, you are afraid of this and afraid of that. You believe in the negative conditions. You believe in sickness and in inferiority. You believe that you are not the equal of other individuals in the world. These beliefs are errors. They become dominant factors in the subconscious and are continually outpictured in your life, nor do you have to strut around like a peacock to make people believe what you are not. It is just as much inferiority as the attitude of one who tries to hide himself. We will realize that we are bound to the omnipotence by our divine birth and must begin to use our inheritance at once. We must know that there is an infinite supply and that we are the channels through which it flows. We must enter into our inheritance at once. Tomorrow never comes. We must keep the supply moving, and by so doing we gain more and more for ourselves. If the body becomes moribund, accumulating waste, it dies. So does the mind die or become insane if it becomes bound by negative conditions. The individual becomes affected by this moribund material to which he is reacting all the time. You, as students of divine metaphysics, will no longer react to these conditions in this life, nor will you react to the mental strata inherited from the past. You will create in the inner realm that which you want to see on the external. Spirit is all there is. There is nothing else but spirit. Jesus said, "As Moses raised up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." This means that the individualized spirit in man must be recognized. By this recognition, the Son of Man will see that he is the Son of God, thus he will be raised up. Man is further warned that by eating of the fruit of the tree of good and evil he will die in his sin. Here again is the great truth revealed to man, that he must see the divine in his nature, that nature in him that knows neither good nor evil, for these are relative terms belonging to man's conception of things. The divine nature expresses itself according to the nature, which is perfection, but when man does not see his divine nature, he creates in himself what he thinks. Jesus, again, says in effect that man must take hold of the tree of life, the true life that is within him, and this will be as a spring of living water rising up to eternal life. By so doing, the law is fulfilled, because man will then become one with this life that is eternal, and as he grows into the supreme knowledge of the truth, so he will see that he must also be eternal. When we further examine the allegory of the Bible, we see that the Garden of Eden represents the soul where these two trees are growing. The one is the tree of life, the true nature of things, and the other is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The latter belongs to man's intellect and the former belongs to God. The one what man thinks it is, but the tree of life is that which knows what it is. So it is that man then takes hold of the tree of life, and that, to him, will be the spring of living water rising up to eternal life. Therefore he does not see good or evil, because he knows that they are relative terms. He acts in accordance with the wisdom that is within him and outpictures this wisdom in his life. He becomes a living example of the divine nature that is within him. Adam and Eve are not separate persons, but the two principles of the human individuality, which are so closely united as to be represented as a wedded pair. These two principles are the inner and the outer, the soul and body. As the body has no existence outside the soul or life that is in it, it must of necessity outpicture what the soul feels and sees. The soul is the individual expression, where that individual expression, not knowing itself completely, is liable to outpicture error. The soul of man is that instrument of the spirit that moves on all the different planes of existence. Yet a person can leave the physical earth and be just as ignorant after he leaves as when he was in it. 5 minutes after he is dead, he is just the same as 5 minutes before he was dead. The only truth in us is the recognition of this divine principle that enables us to think positively, knowing exactly what it will do, and, by a form of instinctive and intuitive nature, the spirit itself guides us in everything we do. There is no wondering why I did this or should I have done that. There is complete movement, always outwardly, knowing that every move that is made is the right one. So, as the body has no existence outside the soul or the life that is in it, it must of necessity outpicture what the soul feels and sees. Therefore Eve is the soul and Adam is the body. As Eve is deceived, so is this deception outpictured in the body as a natural sequence of the law inherent in man himself. The whole story is allegory, and unless you know the truth, you cannot understand it. Since the soul is the builder of the body, the deception which causes wrong thinking on the part of the intellectual man reproduces itself in the physical imperfection and in extremely adverse circumstances. Here we see the explanation that the soul must recognize the tree of life, so that this same divine life in which God made man in his own image and likeness shall be produced in the outer. This is also confirmed by the Master's words to Nicodemus. Nicodemus had asked when the desirable state would come about when man would be born of the Spirit, and Jesus replied, when the inner becomes the outer and the outer becomes the inner. What man thinketh in his heart, so is he. How absolutely clear and distinct is this teaching, and yet how few people comprehend it. All our religious life today is built upon the intellect, that element which creates images and believes them to be true. Thus man falls into sickness and limitation. The divine man does not create images, contrary to the divine image. He knows himself to be, and from this knowledge of himself he works from within outwards, knowing the nature of his inner self, that the nature of his inner self is essentially divine, producing it in the outer. The world today is ruled by the intellect, and not until the true light of the Spirit is revealed to man's own consciousness can there be any peace on earth or harmony in soul and body. This peace and harmony must come first into the soul of man, when man is once more like that image and likeness which he really is in the mind of God, and then he will not be at variance with his brother. This is the only solution to all the misery in the world today. But who teaches this extraordinary and wonderful truth, this divine metaphysics that enables man to understand himself, that enables him to cast from himself all error, belief in sickness, belief in poverty and belief in misery? It is decidedly not the Church. Man could be free tomorrow if only 50% would recognize this truth. This is the only solution to all our misery caused by sickness, and persecution through lack of true wisdom. We persecute our brothers, we kill them, we destroy them, and after that we judge them and we crucify them. We call for more and more sacrifices. We nail the Christ to the cross daily, and we allow our leaders, who are even more blind than ourselves, to heap more misery upon us. Has there not been enough misery in the world already by the crucifixion of Christ in the hearts of every man and woman, by our hearsay and actions of selfishness, individually and collectively? We are all fighting over the things of the world, and yet the world belongs to no one. How wonderful it is when we see everything clearly in its true nature. When we see things clearly through wisdom's eyes, we change entirely. Wisdom came to the world 2,000 years ago. Wisdom was crucified, and is still being crucified today. Yes, we are all fighting over the things of the world, yet the world belongs to no one. We form monopolies to corner and control all the commodities of life. We then stand behind these groups to form a government to protect them, and an army to fight for them, and a religion to preach and pray for them. I sometimes wonder whether there is a sane person amongst us. The Church has failed utterly. It is no longer the voice of God, but the voice of our political, social, and economic system, aiding and abetting their evils instead of exposing them and leading us into the true light. It is utterly impossible to extricate ourselves out of the morass by means of peace treaties or by patching our old worn-out systems based on ignorance of the truth, which is evident to any sane person who can think. We are getting deeper and deeper into the mire, and no one seems to know the way out. The cry must again go out, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. This is the only way that man can free himself individually and collectively from all the misery and sickness and want, and gain that perfect state of health and happiness which is represented as the promised land flowing with milk and honey, and all the bounties of God waiting for sons and daughters to partake thereof. Come to the feast. That is the story. We must look up and there see the real man with our spiritual senses, our intuitive faculties and clear sight through which wisdom makes its truths known. It is our response to this wisdom that makes us truly intelligent. When we recognize our true identity, we become scientific and, by the help of divine wisdom, help to banish all errors from ourselves and the world. Therefore, it is just as important for us to know our errors as to know ourselves. We find people trying to lead the individual while they are still wearing blinkers themselves, oblivious to their own errors, and focusing their attention on the effects of these errors, with the result that these errors are being harbored in their souls and repeatedly expressed. We must see clearly the divine mind and the carnal mind. We must become aware of the errors so that we can correct them with truth, then they will no longer exist in our lives. These errors will pass away, leaving no trace. So it is just as important to know our errors as to know ourselves. We will then see that which is real and that which is not real. We are what we think we are. If we think we are subject to sickness, limitation, and want, then these things will be ours because of our belief in them. But if we know that we are not subject to these things, then reality will take their place, and this should be the dominant idea in our mind. Then every other thought would have to agree with the dominant idea, then error would not be accepted. We would thus attract the real things of life. According to the attraction of the central idea, so would we attract things appertaining to it. If the dominant idea in our mind was doubt, fear, sickness, one in misery, then we would attract all these things to us, and our lives would be the outpicturing of the things attracted to the dominant idea in our mind. Remember then the dominant idea, hold fast to it, think about it just as the little boy thought of the water running off the duck's back. Hold the dominant idea in your mind and it will attract everything according to its own vibration. The more we inquire into what we really are, the more we will find out what we are not. And when we come to know what we are not, we will see that disease, misery, chaos, and lack are of our own making, and that the real man has no part in it. We will recognize that the cause is in ourselves. We will see that we have developed an image of our own creation through ignorance of true wisdom, that image, that man is a creature subject to birth, life, and death, subject to all evils including disease, and because of this he has almost blotted himself out. This is not the real man, but an image, a shadow, and a damn bad one at that. It is only by a simple word like damn that you will be made to understand. Yes, you are the creator of error, and that error is developed and outpictured. We know to our cost when error or ignorance directs, all goes wrong, and when wisdom directs, all goes right. We are seeing it in our peace conference and our various organizations. We see it not only in our country here but all over the world in the present day. We see ignorance and error directing, we see everything going wrong. But when wisdom directs, all will go right. And, remember, this wisdom is in ourselves. Divine metaphysics reveals the truth of our being, one with the eternal good. Our thoughts originate in the consciousness, and if the consciousness is ignorant of its true nature, the source of error is then created. But when the consciousness becomes aware of itself and its true nature, it produces thoughts in accordance with the wisdom of truth. So I want you to think. Take a few minutes every night, and think about your consciousness. Feel you are conscious, and you will know that from your consciousness flows all your thinking. It is the originator of your thinking. If your consciousness does not know its own source, it will become conscious of error, and you will find that your thoughts will express the error. But when your consciousness is aware of its true source, you will begin to think thoughts of wisdom. I can assure you that it is the most amazing experience you can have in your life. Try it out and see. Your thoughts actually change, and when we think through wisdom and truth, we are no longer bound by our self-imposed slavery, we are free. The glorious freedom that truth reveals to us is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. It remains for us to partake of our divine inheritance. With dominion over all things, man's spiritual understanding enables him to control everything beneath him, but man must first master himself through love and understanding, and becoming aware of his spiritual state while living in the flesh. The great and mighty truth is this, that as your consciousness becomes aware of its true source, linked in with the great infinite consciousness that is behind all creation, there comes a time in your life when you feel all things are possible. Doubt comes into your mind from the intellect, through your reactions to things external to the self, where consciousness is aware only through the senses. Do you not see how essential it is that you should become aware of your consciousness in God, to realize that your consciousness is the externalization of that consciousness that first created all things and exists in its own creations, and man is made in the image and likeness of God who created all things, revealing man's true nature. It is this same awareness of consciousness that made all the masters in the past, all the great saviors and sages that existed through all time. Men who perform so-called miracles are no different from any others except that they have the recognition of their true nature. We saw both Jesus and the Christ, and so you must see your own name and see the Christ too. Then you will see the outer and you will see the inner. When the natural man speaks, it is mortal, but when the Christ speaks, it is spiritual. When ignorant of the divine law of creation, man does not see beyond secondary causes, and because of his own creative power he creates thoughts that are ever externalizing conditions representative of his conceptions, so he becomes more and more involved in the network of conditions from which he finds no escape. Because he is ignorant of the true law of his creative power or causation, he never suspects the real facts that the originating power of all this inharmony is in himself. The more we dwell on evil and fear the evil we ourselves create, the more is produced, and this means death. Immediately we become fearful, we create those conditions in our own lives that we fear, and we become involved more and more in that which we fear. Not until such time as we recognize that we ourselves are the creators of this fear and the conditions that are represented in our circumstances and in our lives will we be free. I had a peculiar case the other day of a young man suffering great mental strain. He had tried to overcome his difficulties by affirmations, and he had gone into Christian Science, yogi, etc., but seemed to be getting deeper and deeper into the mire. He came to me in a dreadful state. I could see he was just ready for a real breakdown or an insane asylum, but immediately I showed him the great secret that all the time he was delving into these books he never realized that he was the creator of his own thinking, the creator of the dominant idea in his mind. So as to the trouble that he had, and everything he thought about and read about, Whether it was Christian Science or yogi, it all formed around the dominant idea regarding his fear. Everything he thought and read surrounded it, and he was bound. Every thought was turned towards his negative condition. So I began to show him clearly by unfolding his mind. He looked at me with wide open eyes and said, "I have never seen it like that before." He then felt free. I told him not to worry anymore, and not to read any more books in the meantime, but just to hold on to the dominant idea, recognizing the truth. I showed him how his mind worked, how error was produced, how real man had no part in it. As I showed him clearly that matter was just mind materialized, and that his thoughts were the materializing medium, his mind became clear. In 5 minutes he was well. That is divine metaphysics, showing you the way out of error. Most people are confused with the various ideas, this religion, and that religion, this sect and that sect. Yes, the more we dwell on the evil and fear the evil we ourselves create, the more is produced, and this means death. Anyone can see now that this is the stupid intellect at work. As the intellect is very much limited in man, he is unable to grasp the great truth, so he outpictures the error in thought. It is evident that the more we dwell on the conditions we ourselves create, the more powerful they appear to oppose us. And the more we try to eliminate them without this truth, the more they will establish themselves in us because they become more dominant. The dominant idea is generally error and not truth. If I want to get away from a wall, I do not push it away from me. I just move away from it. Conditions have no power of their own, then do not push at them, for the more you push, the stronger they get. But immediately you turn in the opposite direction, knowing that they have no power of their own, you move in the right direction and you are free. We must look to the Christ within, and the Christ as the example to bring forth our true nature. If we fail to do this, there is a feeling of internal poverty. We try to cover up this internal poverty through seeking position, clinging to society, and desiring things, only to find ourselves deeper in the vicious circle, and then there is no harmony within or without. When the Christ is established within, there is no internal poverty, no feeling of weakness, no feeling of inferiority, no feeling of want, no suggestion of a vacuum that you cannot fill. We seek to cover up this internal poverty by seeking things from the outside, and we find ourselves more and more in the vicious circle. Do you not see now how this vicious circle is created? When man recognizes Christ in himself, then, through the center of his own being, flows the divine life, and as the Father has life in himself, so he grants the Son to have life in himself. That is how the Son of God can say, "I and the Father are one." Also we see the Son of Man and the Son of God, one is the inner, and the other is the outer. The Son of God is the inner man, and the Son of Man is the outer, and that is why the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that he will recognize his true being and know that he is the Son of God. And if you know that you are the Son of God, then you inherit from your Father all that is his. Is there any other source? You live and move and have your being in God. You cannot exist outside him. When harmony is established in oneself through understanding, it attracts harmony, health, and happiness. When you know the truth of the indwelling spirit of power, thy sins are forgiven thee. Now arise and walk. Thus the cause has been removed, and the effect must disappear too. The cause has always been the belief in sickness, disease, and in all those things that make man a slave. If anyone can completely understand this now in the innermost part of his soul, completely, without any doubt whatsoever, these conditions will fall away. So we see then that the effect disappears too, yet medical science today in treating effects is only intensifying the suffering of humanity. We must eliminate the cause, for if we live in the world of effects trying to eliminate them, it means only death to both soul and body. We add to the effects by the power of our own creative thought through the belief that the conditions or effects are real. It is really extraordinary to see so many people in this world today weighed down by the effects of the name of a disease which is given to them by the medical people. I am not decrying medicine, but showing you the fallacy of its mode of action. If you had no trouble, you would soon have had one given by the identity of a name, and you would have gone about quite pleased with the name. All your friends would have begun to know about it. As you trotted it around, they would have begun to believe in it too, and so it would have increased in size until eventually you would have come to the conclusion that it was better to get rid of it. But that is not so easy, for it is established in the mind. Not until the enlightened mind comes along to show you how it originated, that it was the state of mind at one time, and as it gathered together the fluids of the body, it formed the idea in matter. When you see that matter is but mind materialized, that you materialize this condition in your body, and by bestowing your attention upon it you realize that the only power it has is the power you give it. If you withdraw the power you gave it, it has no power of its own and will dissolve away into nothingness. We give disease power by our own creative faculty until eventually it becomes so great that we cannot move it. We virtually destroy ourselves, assisted by a system of medicine that knows. Nothing about the real healing power of life. Only by discerning our thought action and realizing the truth about ourselves can we be freed from all these conditions and limitations. When we succeed in correcting the error, the fluids in the system change and establish truth or health. The truth is the cure for all cases. Disease is but a name for the disturbance of the fluids or mind. The mind or fluids are calmed by the divine truth. Herein lies the great and wonderful power of the truth that sets you free. Now just think on this: your real state is divine. When the fluids are calmed and the mind is calm, the real state asserts itself. When the fluids or mind are disturbed, then we call it disease. I cannot put it in plainer language, and the fewer words I use, the better. Just think what these few words mean to you. Read them again. You make your own prison house with the human mind. Your judge, jury, and gaoler you'll find. You can free yourself if you'll only try, by raising your consciousness from low to high. So we find we are our own gaoler, we are our own judge, and we make our prison house with our human mind. And we can free ourselves if we will only try, by raising our consciousness from low to high. Meditation. Relax the whole body and mind and come into a better understanding of the truth that sets you free. As we recognize this truth, we find that our minds become calm and peaceful, and all error dissolves away. So Modi TB.